All right, this is not an official episode. I just wanted to just talk about, answer some comments and questions that have come in. A little easier to talk through them than type through them. And some of them were, asked multiple times, so it always seems beneficial to do this. So we'll keep the conversation going here. So the first one was this was actually from a little further back. And whenever there's one of these episodes that shows wiring, I get lots of questions about Dante, and I typed in a couple responses, but I want to give sort of like a definitive global response on that. Dante looks incredible, having all of those, discrete channels over just a network connection is pretty amazing. But for me, I think I am in general sort of running in the other direction. with I'm sort of devolving in my approach to recording. So I just keep running into the same thing, that these older recordings just sound so much more musical to me. And they're so much more pleasing to just put on the speakers. Now that I have my control room set up, it's getting real close. I had my first like real victory with Helmholtz resonators. Those things are very complicated, and so it's really starting to sound good in there. And I got these Strauss monitors set up, and man, one of my favorite recordings ever is Nat King Cole's Stardust, his version of Stardust. It's a Nelson Riddle arrangement. It's just unbelievably beautiful and magical sounding, and the recording is just I just don't understand how things get to sound like that. And when you put that recording on these Strauss monitors in this new listening environment, it is I've just never heard anything like it. It's it's so overwhelming. It's totally incredible. And on that recording, there's no Dante, there's no digital, there's no nothing. And so, I feel like whatever stuff was going on back then seems to still be contributing, some of the deficiencies and aberrations in the sound or distortions or whatever it might be still seem to be more musical. And so Dante it may have the benefit of having a bunch of super clean mic preamps right close to the sources and all of that stuff, but that's not really the direction that I'm running in right now. And so maybe down the road that it'll make a lot of sense for me, and I'll want to do that. But cleaner and more digital conversions, and as I've looked into it, adding latency sort of built into the signals that you're actually capturing. All of that feels like a different direction that I'm headed in. So seems like amazing technology, and I'm sure there's a lot of instances where it really does make sense. But at 96K, they're saying the average is 1 millisecond of latency. I guess it varies depending on your network, bandwidth and stuff like that. But 1 mil, that's almost 100 samples at 96K. Add that to whatever, maybe the 128 samples in your hardware buffer, and you've got over 200 samples of delay in there. That is very audible for the musicians that are trying to play, and so that's one of the other things that I'm really trying to minimize in my setup. And so, the combination of all those things just feel like it's just not the direction I'm headed in. So there's the answer. There's no Dante in this new setup, as cool as it might be. It's just not making sense for me. So there's that one. And I guess also related to that, for a very, very long time, I've really been touting this thing of keeping the mic preamps close to the sources, and I was really committed to that for a long time. I discovered that like in the 90s. I did that for Third Eye Blind record and all the Smash Mouth stuff and a lot of stuff for a very, very long time. And then again, I just realized at a certain point, that I'm using this kind of like more eclectic collection of tube mic preamps and stuff. It's not as practical to do that. And so whatever is happening in that length of cable is the same thing that was happening, in the 50s or 60s, when so many of the recordings that still feel the most musical to me was going on then. You know, they had big, long, whatever, 100-foot tie lines going out in these big, you know, sound stages and stuff, and it wasn't a problem for them because those recordings sound absolutely stunning. And so I think, you know, at a certain point, I just decided in this new setup, screw it. I don't want to have to deal with, you know, running out in the room and adjusting mic preamps anymore. Didn't seem to be a problem on the recordings that I love. So so I'm gonna have all the mic preamps in the control room now. I've totally changed my tune on that. So that also, you know, probably is leading me away from Dante as well. So there it is. That's the whole tale there. So then there's a bunch of stuff, really cool comments and questions about the RCA console. I think some of it I may have not explained things clearly because there's quite a few questions about doing the stereo conversion. So I'll talk about that. Yeah, so this is the first one here. This is Cam Shash or Cam's Hash or something. Hey Eric, sorry if I misunderstand, but what's the benefit of combining the master bus plus monitor bus to make a stereo master if the individual channels lack panning? Would the benefit be just to have a dual mono output into Pro Tools or tape? Okay, so I thought I tried to explain how I'm setting this stuff up, but I think this should be able to clarify things, at least what is going to make sense for me. So I really love the sound of the summing amp on this thing, which is a combination of two primary stages. There's an input stage, which looks like it's the same 12 AY7 gain stage that's in the mic preamp. So it looks like there's a mic preamp stage initially, and then there's this output stage that has 6v6s that can, you know, drive the outside world. And so in fact, the program bus or the main, you know, mix bus was only a single 6v6 because it is single-ended Class A. And so I wanted to get the two of those to match better. And the way I'm using this thing is I set up all the mic preamps to have direct output, so I can have 6 microphones go in and have 6, you know, line level outputs that can get captured into Pro Tools or through a tape machine or whatever. Everything ultimately gets combined together in various ways in the computer. And if I wanted to do, you know, graduated panning, I would do that in Pro Tools. And then instead of using the passive summing network that's in the RCA console, where you can only assign left or right, I will send out of Pro Tools to the various passive inputs on the Pyrisum passive summing mixer. So I'm essentially replacing the passive summing mixer on the RCA with the passive summing mixer that I built. And then the final stereo output of that passive summing mixer can go directly to the now matched Class A summing amps in the RCA console. And so the path ends up essentially being the same as what the RCA console originally was, where it was, you know, mic preamps that assign, well, at the time it was mono. They would just assign them to the, you know, the summing bus, and then you had the big knobs where you could set levels, and they would go through that summing bus, come out, and go to wherever you needed to go, either the transmitter for a radio station or to a record lathe or to a tape machine or whatever. And so it's still that same basic path, except I've put the Pro Tools DAW in there. So mic preamps then go to the DAW. The DAW goes to my Pyrisum passive summing network, and the output of that passive summing network goes to the pair, the stereo pair of the RCA summing amps. And so that's why it was important for me to have two of them, because I do work in stereo. There's times where I probably would rather work in mono. I'm a long ways away from Atmos, but mostly in stereo. And so in the computer, using my pure sum mixer, I can pan things, do graduated panning and stuff, the way things are, sort of pre-summed in the computer, and go to either stems or get assigned to the passive summing mixer in a way that allows me to pan things the way I need to. And so then, that all goes through the RCA, summing amps. Then I really get the whole sound of that console. It is pretty wonderful, the whole thing. And so typically when I'm recording through that console, I'm never going through those summing buses and capturing that signal into the computer. I'm just capturing the mic preamps directly into the computer and/or concurrently through a tape machine at the same time. And so those summing buses only come into play when I'm doing the very final mix. I monitor through them the whole time while I'm recording, because they really have a significant impact on the sound that you're hearing. And so I'm making a lot of choices based on how those things are affecting the sound. They do a lot of work on getting that thing to sound, like a cohesive, finished recording. And I'm finding I don't have to work as hard. So, and so I get the benefit of that whole kind of sonic signature of that RCA console, while incorporating all of the workflow benefits of having the computer in there and being able to edit and use plugins that I love and all that stuff, and just have that be part of the path. So hopefully that makes it clearer, because I think I probably breezed over it a little too quick before to actually, because there was quite a few people that asked about that, and I think I just probably didn't explain it well. So there it is. Hopefully that's clearer. There's some other really helpful comments in here. Make sure you don't disconnect the monitor amp even if you don't use it. So the monitor amp is still connected. It just got turned into a Class A version of it. Now there's only one 6v6, so it is drawing a little less power, and so that means that voltage is going to go up a little bit. And you're totally right. The power supply for the RCA console is not regulated, and so it has to sort of reach this equilibrium, as the circuits are pulling, power from the power supply, the voltages will drop, and so you have to find this sort of balance there. And I got it to a place where they're close. The voltages never really on the console that I'm using are running exactly where the manual says they should. They're all just a little bit under that, but I don't know, it seems close enough and it sounds great, so I'm not going to worry about it. And it has sort of varied at times too. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but okay. And so then there was a question about which record did you record with it. Right now, the only thing that is out that can be heard is this most recent Nickel Creek record. That whole record was recorded through, as much as possible, the RCA mic preamps. And so when I was tracking them, all the primary instruments would go through those preamps. So it would be mandolin, acoustic guitar, fiddle, and then if it was one where they're singing at the same time, then there are 3 vocal mics. So there's my 6 mic preamps. All the primary instruments. There's typically upright bass on this record. We had Mike Elizondo playing bass, which was incredible. And so for the bass stuff, I used other stuff, some other tube preamps, and saved the RCA stuff for just the core instruments. And so and then even like if they weren't singing at the same time as tracking instruments, then I could use those mics for other stuff. I could use those mic preamps for other stuff. I could use it for the bass and if there's room mics and stuff like that. So, but always all the main mics that were being used would go through the RCA mic preamps. Everything went through a tape machine, got captured in the computer, and then when I mixed that record, the final stereo output, everything all finally summed down to just 2 channels, went through those 2 stereo RCA, those 2 channels of the RCA summing buses, and then to a tape machine. And in this case, it ended up going to an Ampex ATR 102, something a little more hi-fi than the thing that I showed, the Ampex 300 series. There's a question further down about that. That thing, I tried it. I definitely tried it for Nickel Creek. It was a little bit too lo-fi for them. I needed something that maintain a little more detail in their whole world. So the Ampex ATR 102 worked beautifully for it. Half-inch 2-track machine. Okay, so then there's the next one. I love doing that stuff. Did you use some sort of current limiter when you fired it up? I made a light bulb one for about $5. Very clever. Yeah, that's the smell of old tube gear coming back to life. Yeah, it is a pretty magical smell. I did use a Variac when I first powered the thing up, so it wasn't this huge rush of current, when it first turned on and all the caps trying to charge up and stuff. So slowly turned it on, but there was just no question. I think I didn't even try to turn on the power supply before replacing the electrolytics. I knew those were bad. I even tested them. The values were so far off that I knew that those needed to be replaced. And so, yes. So yeah, I did do that. Slowly turn it on, try and save as many caps as possible. But ultimately, I found there's another question coming up that I'll clarify. But I replaced all the electrolytics and then realized way too many of even the film caps were too far off their values, and so I replaced all those as well. They're just too old, 70 years old, Okay. So here's one of the other questions about the stereo channels. Okay. Okay, so this one is interesting. I can talk more about this. Okay, obviously worked on many desks. I'm really curious what makes the RCA so cool. Also, how the heck do you? Okay, saying how do you know so much about electronics? And the reality is, I don't. I don't know that much about electronics. I don't have an electrical engineering degree. That's a very real endeavor to actually take in all of that information. My father was an electrical engineer. He worked in aerospace, hence the fascination with aerospace stuff. And so I was around it growing up, but really whatever I know, I've just learned from Larry Jasper, the circuit designer for Undertone Audio, just asking a lot of questions of him. So my knowledge of electronics is very spotty, and so there's specific things that I've learned that just address the things that I need to do, need to know to get stuff done that I'm fiddling around with. And whenever I get into trouble, I have the luxury of being able to call Larry, who knows absolutely everything. And so it's an incredible resource. At some point, we're going to do like maybe a live Q&A with Larry. I'm going to get him on this thing, and people can just ask him questions. It's super fun because he just knows everything. It's amazing. So then, let's see. Okay, what makes the RCA so cool? Okay, so it boils down to one simple thing, which is harmonic distortion. That RCA console has a huge amount of harmonic distortion. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of math here for a second, because I meant to do this in advance, so I could sound like a big, swifty, smart guy here. But I'm not that smart. I want to make sure I get this right. Okay, yeah, okay, but ultimately, yeah, this number doesn't, wait, is that right? That doesn't seem right. Okay, so, yeah, okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, so just to give you an idea how much distortion there is, like the Undertone Audio mic preamps, when they are set at sort of their cleanest setting, maybe no transformers, whatever, and they'll pass a signal of somewhere in between plus 27, plus 28 dB. It varies a little bit with the tolerances of the components, but that's really what it's designed to do, is to pass somewhere in that range. Then there's a clip point, and then the harmonic distortion reading kind of goes bonkers, because it's actually clipping. But before it actually clips, you will get a harmonic distortion reading of 0.005% at plus 27.5 dB. The RCA console at plus 18 dB will give you a harmonic distortion reading of 1%. That is 200 times the amount of distortion at a level that is 10 dB lower. At plus 18, the distortion is not measurable on the Undertone Audio preamps. You can certainly set it so it'll do a whole lot more harmonic distortion with the load switch and transformers and all that stuff. But that's just kind of a general indication of how much more distortion you're getting out of something like this old tube circuitry in the RCA console. And for me, and beyond that, so beyond the fact that there's just a lot of distortion, and and I think at the levels we're talking about, plus 18 dB compared to the undertone stuff, it's almost an infinite amount, because it's not measurable on the undertone stuff, and you have 1% distortion on this. Whoa, that was loud. On this RCA console. And so when I really sort of discovered my love of distortion at a certain point along the way, because early on, I started off working on equipment that did not have a huge amount of headroom, or I was using like a Fostex B16 half-inch 16 track, which is a very limited headroom, huge amount of distortion. Things come out of that sounding, pretty mushy compared to how they went in. And so early on, it was a constant battle to try and preserve as much headroom and minimize distortion as much as possible, because there was just so much of it just baked into everything that I was using. And so that was really my, my quest. All of my focus was like, how do I get this cleaner, punchier, clearer, all of that stuff. And then there was a certain point where the equipment got good enough where it was plenty clean. And so I didn't really have to chase that anymore. By the time I got to, a Studer 800 tape machine and a Neve console, believe it or not, like at that point, things started to just, at times just sound really, really clean, and stopped sounding like some of the old records that I really loved, like some of the early Led Zeppelin records that are, recorded on, either Helios console, which has dramatically less headroom than than a Neve console, or and recorded on like an old, like they apparently the first Led Zeppelin record was done on an 8-track 300 series, like 1-inch Ampex machine. That is just a huge amount of distortion going on there, and so. So when I realized that, it really started to reveal itself to me what is important about it. And what it boils down to for me is how the dynamics in the music are affected. And so when you're recording particular sound, let's say drums, you have all of these transient peaks that are jumping out at you, right? And let's say you have no distortion at all, and you are hearing the purity of what was being captured entirely, then those dynamic peaks are much more dramatic compared to the softer moments. When there's distortion in there, what ends up happening is that the frequencies that are the most dominant in the dynamic peaks get converted into overtones along the harmonic series. And so let's say you have a peak at 1K, then if there's harmonic distortion involved, that peak at 1K ends up being quieter, and then what gets added is a little bit of 2K, the second order harmonic, and then there's another one at the third order, fourth order, fifth order, all of that, all the way up the harmonic series. And it's very interesting when you look at this RCA console. You can put a 1K sine wave through that thing and look at it with FabFilter Q3. It has that really wonderful spectrum analyzer. You see 1K, then you see boop, 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 all these other frequencies on it because of all the harmonic distortion. And that 1K being converted, the volume of that gets converted into all of these harmonic overtones. And that, for me, that is really the essence of what makes that stuff, the harmonic distortion in older equipment, really sound musical. You don't have these really stark frequencies poking you in the ear, assaulting you with all of this dynamics. And not only are they being turned down, but they're being layered with these beautiful higher overtones that make things sound a little bit brighter without having to add EQ. And so that's why for me, a lot of these older recordings, they have this immediacy to them without sounding harsh, you know. And if you take a really, really, really pure, clean recording and try to boost a bunch of high end on it to give it a bunch of presence, it's just abusive sounding. It's so unpleasant, you know, like it's just kind of a disaster. It really doesn't make sense to my ears. And this is the experience that I've had with the RCA console, is that when I'm recording through this thing, everything comes back sounding so much more finished to me that, and I really haven't had an experience like this very much, where this was all, you know, the Nickel Creek record was recorded at Nashville RCA Studio A. And in that place, they had an API console that was just installed there. And so with the setup that I had, mic preamps were coming in. I would capture those directly in the computer, but they would also show up at the console. And sorry about that. I got things dinging over here. Let me turn that off. Do not disturb. Okay. And so I have mic preamps that go directly into the computer, but they also go into the console and then go through a tape machine, and I can have compression, all kinds of stuff. And so I was finding that I could use, you know, API 550 EQs, what they had installed on the API console, which traditionally, they're great EQs, but had traditionally not really been my favorite EQ because they're just not super flexible. You know, it's like you can add some more presence or some more bass, but you can't really get surgical with them. And so, but under this context, it worked incredible because everything had been balanced harmonically. And so there weren't really frequencies poking out at me so much. Then I could make those very broad decisions of just like, I just want this a little brighter overall. And I'm not going in there like tweezing out these overtones that are sticking out at me and driving me crazy. And so I had not really had an experience like that before. And so there was so much less of that type of surgical EQing on the Nickel Creek record, and ultimately another album that we'll get to talk about soon, hopefully, once it gets announced. And it is a great experience. Like, you just pull stuff up and it feels so musical. It's like, a little brighter, maybe a little more mid-range, maybe, you know, a little more bass. Maybe this needs a high pass, whatever. Just these very simple, broad brush moves, and things just fall into place, you know. It is what I always wanted the recording experience to be like. So I'm not like, trying to find all these things more, you know, whatever, soothe on there. So now we have soothe to fix all these obnoxious frequencies and stuff. And just so much less of that. Really cool. So that was sort of a long-winded explanation why I think this RCA is so cool. I just love it right now. I'm sure at some point I'll move on. There'll be something else. You know, I can never do the same thing for too long. I just get bored and convince myself there's something better. But boy, this is a good one. I think this is going to stick around for a little while. Okay, another person made a comment. Those RCA gizmos is what DW Fern preamps are based on. I've heard that. A few different people mentioned that. I don't have a lot of experience with the DW Fern preamps. I know people say they're incredible. If they're anything like these RCA ones, I'm sure they're great. Yeah, it's a beautiful sounding circuit. Okay, this guy, Lucian Appleton, I favor carbon film resistors on tube stuff. I read through this. Clearly, this is a person that knows way, way, way more about tube circuitry than I do. The modern amp section would no doubt sound better if the output tubes were driven by a 12AU7 or 12 instead of a 12AX7. You're probably right. They may not need that much gain at that stage. Right now, the journey that I'm on with this thing is I love the sound of it so much, I don't want to change a darn thing. So that may be something to experiment with in the future, but even goes as far as saying dropping the plate and cathode resistors, you know, dropping down the 220K and the 2.2K cathode resistor to accommodate the better choice of tube as well. Let's see, the 39K. Phase inverter is fine. Okay, yeah, so like this person really knows their way around a tube circuit. And makes the point that the Unfairchild is a push-pull circuit. And and absolutely right. They sound great. And so in this case, I felt like I had to. I wanted these two to match up. That was really the only thing I needed to get out of it. And it was because there was more stuff. There were two 6v6s in the push-pull version with the monitor amp, and there was only one 6v6 in the program output. It was much easier for me to remove a tube and convert the circuit, basically take stuff away and simplify it into being, single-ended or Class A. It was easier for me to do that and have them match. I'm sure the push-pull would have sounded fine if I had gotten it better. I think a huge part of the issue that I was hearing ended up being this capacitance thing. That there was this longer piece of wire in there that caused it to be brighter. That was a lot of the difference that I was hearing. Maybe it would have been fine push-pull, but I feel better knowing that the circuits are matched up. So there it is. He said it makes the general sort of judgment that the monitor amp circuit is overcomplicated and sloppy, but fixable. Too late, it's gone. Well, one way to make it less complicated was to make it Class A, in my opinion, at least. So, because the Class A version of it is I don't know. I'm not that knowledgeable about tube circuits, not as knowledgeable as this person, but the Class A version does seem pretty simple, pretty straightforward. There's just not a lot of parts to it. So there you go. But very good points there. Okay. So this one, I think there might be a misunderstanding here. I thought this would be an opportunity to clarify it. I may misunderstand, or maybe this person did, but let's see if we can clarify this. Probably you already know, but but be careful before replacing all the mustard caps, as they are a big part of the sound. So there was a picture or a little video early on where you could see the original film caps in there, and they look odd. They don't look like, they're so old. I've never seen film caps like this. They actually had color bands on them to indicate the value, and they looked just like really big resistors, but they were actually film caps. And I replaced those with the mustard caps. So, and I think that's what this person, Electronic 808, is referring to. And so, so caps really can have a pretty, fairly significant, influence on the sound. And so I put in those mustard caps. Oh, and also this gentleman said about carbon film resistors. I did seek out and get all carbon film resistors when I rebuilt the Class A version, because that can also affect the sound. So carbon film in the, rebuilt version, when I converted the monitor amp, and then carbon film in the original one. And there's only one mic preamp in there where I replaced them. And it was because this preamp was being noisy, and I was chasing it forever. It wasn't the tube. I was looking everywhere, and I couldn't find it. So finally, I just replaced every resistor with just new metal film ones. At some point, I'll probably try and put some carbon film back in there. But I don't know. Maybe the other person had seen that one and seen a bunch of modern resistors in there. But yeah, this we're getting deep here on all of this tube stuff. But yeah, so those mustard cap film capacitors, those are the ones that I put in, and they are staying in there. So I have no plans to replace those. They're brand new. They should be good for decades. So yeah. And then, I have an Ampex. Here's another question here. Ampex deck, very similar to that, which came out of an old radio station. A lot of them did. Is that a Model 300? Yes, it is a 300 series one. I have two power supplies that I need to rebuild. Yeah, so the Ampex deck that I showed, the way those things work is they had this one 300 series transport that, as I understand it, stayed very much the same over a long period of time. The transport was always the same, and it was the I/O electronics that changed quite a bit. So there was 350 electronics, which was all like hand. I might be getting this wrong, but I think I'm remembering it right. 350 series electronics, which was all hand wired tube, and then there was 351, which was when they started using circuit boards, but it was still tube, and you had an I/O unit for each channel. And then the one that I'm using is the 354, where it's the same like 3RU unit, but they managed to fit 2 channels into that one chassis. And so it is still all tube. They made some changes in the circuitry, of course, to make it all fit in there. But that one, it was available. I had a good version of it, and it sounds great. And Larry refurbished it a long time ago. It's awesome. I think it's still a good representation of that sound. I think if you really want to go for the incredible, like super, super cool original, 350 series Ampex sound, those original 350 hand-wired ones people claim are really kind of the thing. And I'm sure they sound amazing. Okay, and then somebody's asking about, does anyone know if Eric has discussed the recording of his opening theme song in past videos? They apparently like the sound of it. I will do a deconstruction of that at some point. I did that at a certain point along the way because, I was tired of having to deal with every single video have this licensing issue because of that really awesome Johnny Mercer song that I had on there. I loved it. It was hard to let that go, but then beyond a certain point, then they automatically put ads in there. I don't want ads in my videos. So occasionally it comes up if I'm using other people's music as examples and stuff, then it's unavoidable. But for stuff like this, it's better because then I don't have to deal with the YouTube whatever music licensing thing that they have going on. So that's why I did it, and it was really fun to do. I talked about it a little bit at one point. That originally I was going to sing, and it was so painful, and so it was Mama Grace to the rescue. She came in and sang that vocal part, instantly, and it was instantly awesome and made it great. So, but yeah, I'll do a deconstruction of that. I did most of that in Topanga, in the Topanga studio. So I wasn't in a big room. I had to sort of simulate all of that either with plugins or various ways to try and make it sound like I was in a big old recording studio. Trying to go for sort of like an old Esquivel kind of sound there. And so yeah, it's a combination of sample library stuff. I did play live drums on it. Trying to think what else, but yeah, it's mostly sample library stuff, and there's some samples. I think I did take some samples of some horn section stuff from an Esquivel thing, and try to piece it all together and make it sound like a cohesive thing. But yeah, we'll do that. I want to actually try remixing that through the RCA console. So maybe that'll be a good time to dive into it. So I think that's everything. I think we're all caught up on our, conversational comments section, questions and comments stuff. And next episode will be on Thursday. So I will see you then. All right. Bye.